Okay, so I'll just start the session now. And yep, good evening, everyone. So before I start off, I will do a brief introduction of myself later on when I hit that slide. So this is a topical revision on market failure. And as you know, market failure is one of the most direct topic, but as for the year one students, it could be something relatively new for all of you. And not to worry, at the start, like the shifting of the graphs can be quite confusing. So a brief introduction on who are we. We are actually a team of tutors who strive to build a student-centric platform, and hence we are conducting these different crash courses to offer to you guys so that you will understand better the various concepts. And as the name goes, it's crash course. So I try to squeeze in as much content as possible within this short time frame. Okay. So yeah, who am I? Actually, my actual name is Tiffany, but I would prefer people call me Ing. You can call me Miss Ing or anything. Yeah, so I specialize in teaching A-level H2 economics. I graduated from SMU. I majored in econs, and I have around 6 to 7 years of tutoring experience. So whenever I teach my students, like they have this huge jump from probably a U or S to A's and B's. And this is something that kept me motivated to continue teaching. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted because people are like still coming in. Give me a moment. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so maybe I can share a bit of my story. So back then in JC, I wasn't doing very well in econs at the start, like in my year ones. To me, I'm not too sure for any of you here, but to me, econs was something very hard to understand, and I could never understand the concept thoughts. So what happened was during around like mid-year 2, I kind of like clicked and understood the things that my teachers were saying. And what really helped me the most was time practice. I know that A-level is less than 8 weeks times, and some of you are probably still looking through your contents, trying to digest everything. Yeah, so one advice to you guys is that content isn't everything. You cannot master all of your content in such time frame, such short time frame. And I would say that even if you don't feel prepared, just keep practicing under time condition. And that's the only thing that will really help you to push up that jump. So not to worry if, like, let's say your prelim score or your recent common test 2 score, you did not do well. I would say that for econs, it doesn't mean that if you scored S or U's previously means that A-level, that's it, gone case. That's not true. Okay, so I'm a living example. So for my prelims, I wasn't doing very well, but I felt that it was because of that last lab that made me understand econs. That's why I kept practicing, and in A-level, I suddenly got an A. And yeah, so don't be demoralized when you get back your result or it's not up to your expectation. I would say just keep trying and keep going. Okay, so for our agenda for today is to give you an overview of the chapter and also content review. And last but not least, I will wrap up the session with a work example. And then I will hold a short Q&A session to answer any burning questions that you have. And if in any point in time you want to stop me, you can let me know, or you can hold your questions till the Q&A session. Okay, so let's take a look at the chapter together. As you know, market failure, it consists of these subtopics. So firstly, I will give you a list of definitions that you need to know for market failure. Okay, I know that for econs, right, when you write your essays, you need to memorize all your different definitions, and it can be quite overwhelming. So not to worry, as time passes, you will realize that you don't have to memorize everything. Once you understand how it works, right, it will just automatically be registered into your brain. Okay, so what I will also do a brief overview on what is market failure. As it is quite a relatively direct topic, right? I will try to speed up the introduction part so that we have more time for work example, because econs is all about applications and etc. It's not about memorizing and vomiting your answers out. So you can know everything, like you can know your contents, but at the end of the day, if you don't know how to apply it to your work example, I would say that it's very hard to get the L3 level. Okay, and it's also important to know what is partial and complete market failure. So I hope by now you guys know that complete market failure is your public goods, yeah? Okay, and yep, like what I mentioned, I will delve deeper into public goods and the different types of externalities, as well as merit and demerit goods. And also the last part, right, on imperfect information. So there are three different parts to imperfect information, which I don't think I'll have time to touch on today. I will still touch a little bit on it during our work example. So content-wise, not so much, but I will touch on it, like focus more on this part during our crash course. And not to worry if you didn't catch any of the contents during this session, there will be a recording uploaded, or I'll send it to you guys as well. And end of the day, I will also send the slides to you guys. So just to let you guys know that for imperfect information, I will not be touching a lot of it over here, but more of it during our actual crash course session. My tongue. Okay, so yeah, this definition, I would say that the purpose of this page is to collate the different definitions together so that you will know, like at one glance, I know, okay, what is market failure? I know what is free markets. You know, sometimes you just don't want to flip through your notes to dig out all the different types of definitions that you have to memorize or understand. So this page is a summary of what you need to know, the different definitions that you need to know for market failure. Okay. Yeah, for those who have just joined, not to worry, I will be uploading the this session. So if you have missed out anything, yeah, you can always look back at it. Okay, firstly, what is market failure? As the name suggests, failure. So it means when market fails, right? Market fails when there's allocative inefficiency, productive inefficiency, basically your inefficiencies, as well as equity. Okay, so for productive inefficiency, it would mostly be categorized under your imperfect information. So likewise, over here, productive inefficiency will be focused during the actual crash course, because there are some year ones over here which they have not touched on market structure yet. I didn't want to confuse them as well. But if any point in time after the session you have any questions regarding things that I did not go through over here, you can always ask me as well. Okay, so for allocative inefficiency, always remember that when a market fails to allocate resources efficiently, it means is allocative inefficient. Okay, so right, whenever you look at your society's point of view, when your market produces and consumes the wrong quantities of some goods and services. So for example, if you think back of your chapter 1, the very first chapter of your economics, you will remember that the price mechanism actually allocates its resources based on who are willing and able to pay. So in this case, right, if let's say the market produces and consume at the wrong quantity, which means it's not at the socially optimal level, it means that the market is being allocative inefficient. Okay, and this actually leads to either over or under consumption, production of your goods and services. So this is your partial market failure. Okay, and the other way is when the market fails to produce the good completely. And as I said completely, right? So it means that the market fails completely. So it's a complete market failure. Okay, so for productive inefficiency, it just means that the producers are not looking for the most efficient method of production, the one which can give you the lowest cost of production. So one example is, for example, if your government gives out subsidies, and sometimes it will cause the producers to be too reliant on these subsidies. So probably the intention of the government was a good one. They want to help the citizens. They want to allow citizens to be able to enjoy goods like healthcare. So for example, if this is the case, right, then it may lead to productive inefficiency because your producers will not be incentivized to look for methods. Will not be incentivized to look for methods to produce at a lower cost of production. Okay, so by doing so, right, your society will be able to will not be able to obtain the most from its limited resources. Okay, so right, you have to understand that in reality, there are actually many firms not perfectly competitive and they do not produce at the lowest cost of production. Hence, in the real world, the perfect markets does not exist. Okay, and last point, the inequity parts. Okay, your market will fail when your goods and services are not distributed equitably to the right groups. Okay, so to some people, they are very confused with inequity as well as inequality. I'm not sure if you fall into this category, but I'll be here to explain to you. So because back then when I was a student, I was very confused with, I always thought that inequity and inequality, they are like the same thing, but actually they are not the same thing. There's still some differences in them. Okay, so looking at this point, inequity means that, right, when your rich and poor consumers, between these two, the poor consumers, right, at the end of the day, they may not end up with the essential goods and services because being a profit motivated producers, they are only willing to produce for those who are willing and able to pay at a higher price. So in this case, right, you might neglect this group of low income group of consumers from the society because we don't want to exclude them from the society. And if that happens, right, it means that inequity happen and hence leading to market failure. So in this case, because these low income group of people, they are not able to afford such goods. So it actually ultimately leads to inequity. Okay, and also between your consumers and producers. So remember, for inequity, it's not always about the rich and poor. It is also between your consumers and producers. Because when you think of the monopoly market, for some of the year ones, if your school have not taught you market structure, so monopoly means that in this market industry, there's only one firm that is producing this good, which means that everyone would have to go to this producer to get their goods. And this producer would exploit their consumers by pricing the good significantly above the marginal cost level. Okay, so in this case, your consumers and producers will actually have this gap because of the producer's ability to exploit your consumers at the expense of your at the expense of lowering consumer surplus. Okay, so right, it means that more profitable and less profitable producers as well. So in this case, usually the new producers who wants to enter the industry will lose out. Okay, so moving on. Yeah, so talking about the complete market failure of good, you have to understand that under the perfect competition, you have to assume that there are no externalities. Okay, so you have to assume that in the perfect market, no externalities. And also, secondly, you have to understand that the market definition, right? So we have the marginal private benefit curve, which measures your benefit, correct? So in this case, right, when we are looking at your public goods, it means that you the goods are not non-excludable. The goods are non-excludable and they are non-rivalrous. So non-excludable means that it is impossible to exclude people from enjoying this type of goods and services. So for example, like national defense and also your street lighting. So today I tell you that, if you walk on the street, you have to pay to enjoy the light. Then it's very hard to exclude who can walk along this street to enjoy the light. Okay, so it's actually really kind of impossible to make people pay to enjoy the light. So what do I mean by non-rivalrous? For example, today you go to so it means that the benefits enjoyed from a goods are not depleted by additional users. Today you go to the park, you smell you pluck a flowers to smell it. Will the next persons who smell it, will the fragrance be depleted? No, right? So this type of goods, they are non-rivalrous, okay? So the type of policy which to tackle such complete market failure is your direct provision of for public goods such as street lighting and national defense. But also do note that your taxpayers are the one paying for this, okay? So yeah, one to evaluate this policy, right, it is actually difficult to accurately estimate the quantity of public good to provide. So in this case, it means that your government might overtax on citizens, and at the end of the day, it will increase the tax burden on your taxpayers. Okay, now next, this everything from here onwards would be your partial market failure. So for externalities, right, you have to understand that there are two different types of externality, your positive externality and also your negative externality. And you need to know that what is marginal social benefit. Marginal social benefit and also your marginal social cost, this is where your society deemed as the most desirable output level here. Okay, so in this case, right, the divergence that always separates your MSB and your MPB, I'm sure you have seen the graph before, it's always separated by your external benefit or external cost, which we will zoom in further later on. So in this case, right, that's why the government would intervene for your citizens to internalize the external costs or benefits. Okay, so for negative externalities, right, in order to explain using negative externality, why did your market fail, there are 5 steps that you have to include to make sure that you have hit the points. So that's why I say, like, for market failure, it's relatively straightforward topic. So if let's say your preamble tells you that your factors already, right, step 1, you just have to define your externality. I know that everything is very brief over here, but we will be doing an example so that you can relate later on, because like I mentioned, econ is all about application. So step 1, you need to define your externality, and hence you can always refer back to the definition, and also determine whether the externalities arise from the consumption or production of the goods or services. So in this case, right, you need to exactly talk about what is the external benefit or external cost that you are referring to over here, and why is it that your producers or consumers only care about their private costs. Okay, then at the end of the day, so when you have to draw the graph, right, one way I will do a quick review on the graph. So for the graph, like that. Okay, so for negative externality graph, as negative means that you have to shift your cost curve, right? So you draw your normal MPB, marginal private benefit curve first, equals to MSB equals to demand, because there is no because there is no external benefit over here, positive externality here, hence because there's no positive externality here, that's why you can assume that MPB is equals to MSB and MPC is equals to your supply curve. So this is where your consumer is consuming over here, correct? But because of where your society deem it to be as the socially optimal output, you know that there's an overconsumption here. So you know that the divergence, right, should be here, because my socially optimal level should be lower than where I am consuming. Sorry, this is QE. So my QF must be lower than my QE. So in this case, right, when QS is lower than QE, you know that this is marginal social cost equals to marginal private cost plus marginal external cost. The divergence in between over here to here is your marginal external cost. Okay, and like I mentioned, when your government intervenes, it's where it forces your consumers to internalize this marginal external cost. Okay, now you have to know how to identify where is your dead weight loss. And this is very often where student makes the most mistakes. So when to know where is your dead weight loss, always remember that the triangle, the tip of the triangle must be pointing towards your socially optimal level. So here is the equilibrium of a socially optimal level, and you know that here is your triangle. Hence, this is the dead weight loss. So can you see that your cost, which is here, this huge trapezium, is actually greater than your benefit under the benefit curve, the area under benefit curve. Hence, cost minus benefit, the area is your dead weight loss. Okay, so this is just a simple explanation on how to draw the graph, because I don't want you guys to just memorize the graph. You really have to get the intuition behind drawing your different curves and understand what does MSC MPB means. Okay, so next, afterwards, step 4, explain market equilibrium output level and socially optimal output level. Then explain the dead weight loss by comparing the overconsumption here. Okay, next, the policies to tackle your negative externalities. This I will send it to you guys later. You can take a look at it. So policies is relatively straightforward, which is also something that we will apply later during our work example. So for policies, right, whenever you tell your whenever you tell the examiners like how the policy works, you need to evaluate. What do I mean by evaluate? You always need to come up with your pros and cons, because all policies have pros and cons. You don't have a one size fit all policies. Okay, so for taxes over here, you need to know how the curve shifts as well. And if at the end of the day, after we gone through our question, we still have time, I will draw the curve up. If not, I will send you this slide with the graphs in it. Okay, so you need to understand, right, when we evaluate on taxes, always whenever subsidies or taxes and etc., you should know that, right, the government will find it very hard to properly estimate how much to tax and how much subsidies to give, because they cannot accurately estimate the external cost and external benefit. It's very hard to put it in monetary value, and then how you know, like, oh, how much subsidies should I give, right? Okay, and next, right, for taxes, you need to recognize the fact that your producers will actually produce different amount of negative externalities. If you impose a tax, it will actually be unfair to some of the smaller producers who don't actually pollute that much. And also your marketable permits works a bit differently from your marketable permits works a bit differently from taxes. So it actually means that your government will try to estimate the socially efficient output level, but at the same time, it is hard to measure these external costs. Okay, so these permits, right, will allow your firm to produce a certain amount of negative externalities. And if you produce anything above, right, you have to pay the fine for it. So for some firms, maybe it is actually cheaper for them to not pollute than to pollute. So in this case, it will force them to internalize their external costs. And hence, this is the benefit of your marketable permits. So for direct provision, legislation, regulation, public education, these are relatively straightforward. And if anything you don't understand regarding my notes, you can always reach out to me on Telegram. Okay, so for positive externality, it would work differently from your negative externality. So the graph for your positive externalities, right, is the same intuition. So this is your cost benefit curve. Okay, so in this case, since it is positive externality, right, which means that we have to assume that there's no negative externalities, which means that your benefit curve will be the only ones shifting. So when you draw your supply curve, which is also equals to your marginal private cost, is also at marginal socially optimal level, which is also equal to your marginal social cost, because there is no presence of negative externalities. That's why there's no divergence on this supply curve. Then in this case, when you draw your marginal private benefit equals to demand curve, it is where your consumers see it as their private benefit and they are consuming at this level. But in actual fact, right, they should be consuming at this level, which is your marginal social benefit. Always remember, for positive externality, right, your socially optimal level must always be more than where you are consuming at over here, which is your QE, and this is your QS. QS must always be more than QE if there's something positive, because it's something good, right? It's where your society wants you to consume at. So you know that your curve will be on the right-hand side. It will be a rightward divergence. So in this case, when we are going to identify your marginal external benefit, you dot it up. This is your MEB. Okay, so your MSB is actually equals to marginal private benefit plus marginal external benefit. Okay, this part is quite straightforward as well. So like I mentioned, to identify your dead weight loss, because some students will find it very confusing, right? You need to identify where is your socially optimal level, which is here. So if here is your socially optimal level, the tip is pointing to a socially optimal level, and hence you know this is your dead weight loss. Okay, so the benefit is actually more than the cost incurred. So for example, healthcare screening. If let's say today I ask you to go to do health checkup, there are many considerations. You think, I need to I cannot go work. I scared, like if I don't go work, what if I'm not paid, and like the cost to pay for my health screening. Okay, so these are the costs that you consider. So they will be the cost over here. The cost over here, yeah. Okay, so these are the costs that you have considered, like the money spent and the leave that you have to take from work, like you'll get unpaid leave and anything. But you did not consider the benefit that having health screening will bring to you. So for example, early detection of certain illnesses may actually prevent you from spending more healthcare costs in future. What if like you go for health screening and touch wood, but you realize that stage 1 cancer, compared to someone where the symptoms starts to arise and you realize that it's already stage 4, and by then you have to go for chemotherapy and everything. It's the healthcare cost that you incur, right, is actually a lot more than if you go for early healthcare screening. So this is actually the benefit that it will bring about. So the fact that the consumers are not consuming at the socially optimal level, this dead weight loss, right, is the cost that they are incurring. It's the welfare loss that they are incurring. Okay, so moving on, these are the policies that you can use for your positive externalities in consumption, like subsidies. Government can give out subsidies to your consumers to ensure that they can give out subsidies to your consumers to encourage them to go for health screening. Okay, but there's also cons to such policy. So your government have to fork this out of their own pocket, right? There will be opportunity costs incurred. Okay, so in this case, the government have to use its own budget to fund many types of expenditure, like education, like healthcare. So if you allocate more to healthcare, this means that you will have lesser to allocate to other sectors of your economy. So this will pose as a strain on your government budget. So where did the government budget come from? Comes from your people. This means that your taxpayers now have to pay more money. Okay, so in this case, your excessive subsidies will actually incur opportunity costs which could have been used for other purposes. And direct provision, usually we wouldn't want to use it in terms of partial market failure, because in this case it will produce inefficiency. Because like for example, your government hospitals, right, they actually are not run on the basis of trying to maximize profit. They just want to provide the service for your people. So in this case, your private run hospitals like your Glen Eagles, all those, they are very profit motivated. And these private hospitals, right, there will be lack of incentives to minimize costs and offer the best standards if they have to provide like direct provision. Okay, so next, demerit goods. Okay, so for demerit goods, right, it would it's an extension of your negative externalities, just that for demerit goods, it's a combination of your negative externalities plus what your society deem as your imperfect information. Okay, because there's lack of information, that's why a combination of your negative externality plus the lack of information would mean that this good is deemed as socially undesirable. So for example, smoking of cigarettes, I can draw a quick one for you to see the graph. As usual, cost, benefit. Okay, so in exam, right, you don't have time to dilly-dally and draw your graph until super nice, it will take a very long time. So usually you just take 5 lines of your foolscap paper. That's the usually like 5-6 lines. That's the size of the graph you should draw. Don't need draw it so big. It takes up a lot of time also. During A-level, you don't have time to really go and focus on your graph and everything. You'll just keep writing and writing, okay? And also, so yeah, for demerit goods is where your perceive of that benefit of the goods is different from the true benefit which the goods will bring about. So in this case, your supply curve will not be shifting, your cost curve will not be shifting, because it is what consumers sees the benefit that it will bring to them. So you know that it's the demand curve that is shifting. So originally, this is where the perceived benefit is, which is also your demand curve. And here is where your consumer is consuming at. But cigarette is bad. Demerit good is a good that society deem as socially undesirable. So you should know that the socially optimal level should be lesser than where you are consuming now. And you know the shift should be like that. So this is actually the true benefit. The true MPB, which is also equals to your socially optimal benefits. Okay, so this is assuming there's no externalities. Okay, so in this case, right, this is where the socially optimal price should be, and this is where the market is pricing the good at. So this is where your government comes in to intervene. Okay, so the steps are the same as your negative externalities, and we will be doing a work example on this later on. And same goes for your merit goods. So for merit goods, right, it just means that consumers are not consuming at the true benefit because their perceived benefit is lower than the true benefit. So that's where you know where you are consuming at now is lower. So you will draw where you are consuming at now first. So every time draw the first equilibrium first. You don't draw too many graphs first, then confuse yourself later on. So identify and label. This is your perceived MPB, which is also your demand curve. And this is where your true MPB should be at, which is your MSB, where society deem it as the socially optimal level. And your supply curve will not shift. Always remember, merit good is what consumers perceive. So supply curve will not shift, will still be equals to MPC equals to MSC. Okay, so this is where the market is pricing its good at right now. And this is where your society is consuming, because this is what they see it as their perceived benefit. And this is where it should be consuming at. For example, health screening. Okay. Okay, so likewise over here, the true benefit that it will bring about is at this equilibrium level, and this is where your consumers are consuming it. Okay, so like I said, imperfect markets is part of your market dominant, your market and failure chapter as well, but I will not be touching much on it on today, but part of it will still be on the next question over here, which we will be going through and applying whatever I have gone through at the top over here. Okay, so in this case, right, can you guys take a few minutes to read these questions? Like maybe 1-2 minutes to read this question before I start on it. Okay, So whenever we see this kind of question, right, we will always want to dissect what the question is asking about. So Singapore is well known for emphasizing on shared responsibility between the government and its people in the healthcare markets. For example, government has implemented strategies like Medisave accounts, government subsidies, and compulsory medical insurance, like your MediShield Life. MediShield Life is an account where Medisave accounts, your government subsidy, and MediShield Life. MediShield Life is an insurance that helps to offset around 90% of your healthcare costs, okay, in order to alleviate the burden of healthcare costs in Singapore. However, healthcare affordability is still a concern in Singapore, especially in an aging population economy like Singapore. So assess the effectiveness of policies available to the government in addressing the different sources of market failure in the healthcare market. So when you see assess, right, means that you have to bring in your pros and cons of your policies. So in this case, it's a 25 marks question. Since it is a 25 marks question, you have to understand that it's not just bringing in your policies and evaluating it at the end of the day. You have to tell me, how did the market fail in the first place? Okay, so to show how your market failed, then slowly leading up to how at the end of the day, your government used the policy to tackle such problems. You need to recognize that your healthcare market here is considered a merit goods. Okay, so if you identify that, okay, healthcare is a merit good, and I always tell my students that before you start your essay, you always have to plan it, because if you fail to plan, it's very high likely that you plan to fail, okay? Because if you plan, right, don't think that, okay, 10 to 15 minutes will take out a lot of your time, but if you fail to plan, you'll get stuck when you are writing your essays. Then you will panic and you will be stuck there for the longest time, and your brain will not be able to function. So just be brave and take 10 to 15 minutes of your time to plan the whole essay. What do I mean by plan? Like, for every factor, for every paragraph, there must always be a start to an end. So one thing that students can't score in economics, because they don't know what is their starting factor, and they always happily write, and then starts linking to other ending point, and at the end of the day, they are not answering the question. Sure, you can have your content, but if you get too excited, at the end of the day, you're not answering the question, you're not going to get the L3 level. So always plan. Tell me what's your starting point, tell me what's your ending point, then slowly link it. What are you going to write in between, and write down your evaluations part. Okay, so since now you recognize that healthcare is a merit good, and there will be market failure because of the presence of positive externality, because of the presence of positive externalities with your consumers' ignorance. Okay, you can also consider other sources of market failure, such as your asymmetric information, maybe because of your supplier-induced demand, right? Like in the case of healthcare, maybe the healthcare services, like your doctors will tell you that, oh, you need this treatment, you need to do that checkup and everything. So this is what you call supply-induced demand. And also market dominance due to the nature of the industry. And there could also be equity issues such as healthcare, because healthcare is considered as a necessity. So previously, just now I mentioned that equity issues can actually lead to market failure. So after explaining your source of market failure, you should explain the range of policies that the Singapore government adopts to address these sources of market failure. Okay, so in order to make it more affordable to the various income groups, the effectiveness of these policies, right, should be examined, okay, like by considering the relevant information and also its ability to address the root cause. So root cause is always what you have to tell me, like whether this policy, does it affect the address the root cause or not. Okay, so in this case, after that, you can analyze the outcomes in the short run and also evaluate the long run consequences. Okay, so firstly, for your introduction, Okay. Okay, so if at any point in time you can't see my screen, please let me know. Okay, so for introduction, right, your market failure. Okay, so for your market failure, oh sorry, I just saw the chat. Someone asked what about inequality. So yes, my bad, I forgot to explain the difference. So for inequity, right, it means that your market neglected those people who are unable to afford the goods, such as necessity goods. So inequality means the gap between your lower income group and your high income groups is gradually widening up. So your poor gets poorer and your rich get richer. But for inequity, it's more of the resource allocation. Your resources are not being allocated to people who needs it. Okay, can? Okay, so that's the difference between inequality and equity. Okay, so right, for introduction, you need to define your market failure. Always see what the question says. Question says market failure. So you know that you need to bring in definition of market failure. Okay, then after defining your market failure, you need to tell me that healthcare is a merit good. So healthcare is a merit good, and hence there will be under consumption. Correct. So hence there will be under consumption, and also in this case the presence of your positive externalities and also your imperfect information. So your introduction, you tell me what are the points that you are going to talk about. So there will be under consumption due to presence of positive externalities and imperfect information. Because if we are merit goods, if this is a merit good, means there's presence of positive externalities and imperfect information. And just now they mentioned about aging population. So these are the little keywords that you cannot miss out. What if you just happily tell me your sources of market failure and you missed out aging population? That also prevents you from getting that high marks during your A-level. Okay, so you need to tell me that when you think of aging population, think of the aged. They are old, they may not have enough funds in their account, not enough money to pay for healthcare goods and services. Okay, hence in this case it can occur due to inequitable distribution of income. Okay, hence both inequity and allocative inefficiency can lead to undesirable allocation of resources, hence market failure. Okay, next. First thing we always bring in is your externalities, because it doesn't make sense to bring merit good first. Merit good is an extension of your positive externality. After you talk about positive externality, you can then go on to tell me about your merit goods. So this is your introduction, and next we'll be talking about the body one. Body one will be saying like, oh, positive externalities. So one source of market failure is positive externality. Okay, presence of positive externalities. Okay, so in this case, right, based on the 5 steps that I mentioned just now, you need to define what is positive externalities. So define positive externalities. And one thing I want to highlight over here, you don't just throw in the definition of positive externality. You need to tell me what, like in the context of your healthcare. So for example, through positive externality are benefits borne by third parties. Okay, so in this case, who are neither the producer nor the consumer. Of the good without payment. So this is where you explain and tell me positive externality give rise to external benefits to third parties. You always have to bring your third parties. Okay, and hence, right, because it gives a positive externality, so in this case, you don't have to memorize, you just need to think intuitively. Okay, since it gives positive externalities, give rise to external benefits to third party, hence it causes this divergence. Okay, so this divergence will actually give rise to the divergence between your MSB and MPB. So because of this divergence, right, you need to bring in your example already. It's all very example driven. So for example, consumption or vaccination. For generates positive externality, right? For employers and co-workers. Because your employers and other workers will benefit because your fellow workers are in better health and it reduces the chances of contracting the disease from your workers. So this is actually important to economic growth of the country because when your productivity rises, it actually rises alongside with better health of the workers. So consumption of vaccination generates positive externalities for employers and workers. Are in better health and reduces the chances of contracting the diseases from their colleagues. Okay, so this is important to the economic growth of country as productivity rises alongside with better health of workers. Then afterwards, where you draw your graph. So just now what I done was step 1 and step 2, telling like identifying what identifying what is my externalities, whether is it consumption or production. So in this case, we are drawing the market due to positive externalities in consumption. So there's no negative externality. That's why your supply is equals to MPC equals to MSC. This is your cost benefit curve. Okay, then this is where it's being undervalued. Currently, this is where your society sees the benefit of consuming the good. So this is where your society is consuming right now. And hence, the price is over here. This is your quantity of healthcare. Okay, so then it causes this divergence over here. So this should be your marginal social benefit, which is the marginal private benefit plus marginal external benefits. Okay, so the divergence here, right?
is known as your MEB. So this is where the socially optimal output should be at. Okay, then next, you need to identify where is your dead weight loss. So for your, in this case, right, since the benefit that it brings about, I will highlight in green, it's here. You're missing out from the benefit that vaccination will give you here. You are only considering the cost that it will give you, which is here. Hence, since your benefit is more than cost, here is your dead weight loss. One way you can identify is like that. Alternatively, the other way that I told you that you can identify is the tip of your triangle will always be pointing towards your marginal socially optimal output level here. So this B, this A. Okay, then this C. Sorry, no. C. Okay, so this is your dead weight loss. Then now you have to explain to me how did the market fail? How did the dead weight loss come about? So this is where you come up with your explanation. So you need to, this is how you explain the graph. Okay, because right, your in the market, everyone is driven by self-interest. So your free market equilibrium will actually be attained at MPB equals to MPC. Okay, at Q level. So at Q level, MPB equals to MPC because consumers only consider their self-interest, okay, where your net private benefits are maximized. So in this case, the MPB of consuming healthcare, you need to tell me what is the benefit. So the benefit of consuming healthcare is person receives of the probability of the person being protected from a disease, while MPCs is actually the cost of the treatment, like I told you just now. Okay. So because that person is being protected from the disease, so they only consider the MPC. MPC we are referring to over here is the cost of treatment or the medication to the cost of treatment or medication to the person. So over here, they only think of the private benefit. They only think about themselves. They don't care about other things. So assuming no negative externalities, your MPC equals to MSC. So the next step, you should tell me that the socially optimal level is only achieved at Q star. Okay, so since it's only achieved at Q star level, right, where your MSB equals to MSC, so you can see that at Q star level, when you dot it out at B, this is where your MSC is equals to MSB, which is where we want all the S to be together. Okay, so this is how you remember it. So where MSB equals to your MSC, so socially optimal level is achieved here where society's welfare is maximized. Okay, so then after that, you need to tell me how did the dead weight loss come about. So at output level, Q, okay, I will reply the inequitable resource later, but I'll touch on this graph first. So Someone asked why did the new MPB and MEB curve are more elastic? It's not that it became more elastic, it's my drawing. So there's no elasticities being taken into consideration in this graph. So just take note of that. Okay, so in this case, right, at output level Q, you need to understand that that is where there is an underconsumption of Q to Q star level. So which is here. Here. So there is an underconsumption. So because there's an underconsumption, right, the society is missing out from this underconsumption. So this results in your marginal social benefits. So can you see that the underconsumption here, right? This part, I'll use another color. From this period, this underconsumption, if you look at this graph, your marginal social cost is actually greater than your marginal private, your marginal social benefit is actually greater than the marginal social cost. Okay. Okay, so in this case, right, because you're under consuming, that's why it is in this case. Yeah. So in this case, it results at output level Q, there's a deadweight loss of area A. So since it results being greater level, so you need to know that at output Q, there's actually a deadweight loss incurred. Okay, then you need to explain that's why market fail. Then next, you need to talk about your numeric goods. So another form of market failure is your imperfect information. So this is where your body 2 comes in. Yeah. Market imperfect information. Okay, so when it is imperfect information, it means that you're explaining the part of your numeric goods. So the market fails. The market actually, the market failure in the market for healthcare, right, is worsened by the presence of imperfect information. So what do I mean by this? It means that, right, your output level in the free market may actually be even lower than your Q level, which was what it was supposed to be at, as shown above. Yeah, so and because of your lack of information, at the end of the day, right, you will consume even lower than where you were consuming before. So in this case, we are going to draw our graph for our numeric goods. The market failure. Okay, all these are like the basic parts, but I'll come to the more complicated part later on, because like this question is quite tough, to be honest. Okay, so the market failure in the market for healthcare is worsened with the presence of imperfect information, okay, such that output level may even be lower than Q as shown in figure 1. So now we are going to draw the graph. Okay, so like I say, it's the consumption curve that is shifting. So MPC will remains the same. Then this is where you perceive the good to be at. So demand curve. Then this is where your true MPB equals to MSB. This is where we want to be. So always identify where is the market consuming at and where the society deem it as socially optimal level. So your cost benefit curve. Okay, so in this case, right, we are going to explain what the graph means. Now I need to tell my examiner what does perceived MPV means. So perceived MPV, right, actually represents the demand of consumers. Then your true MPV actually represents the part where the demand could be at if consumers were not ignorant. And had more information. Okay, so due to ignorance or lack of information, individuals are unable to factor in long-term benefits into their economic decision making. Yeah. Okay, so when they are making such economic decision, yeah, so they did not think of the long-term benefit that healthcare can bring about for them. So because of this, right, they underestimate the true benefit of vaccination or seeing a doctor when they are sick. Then in this case, because they underestimate, then it will mean that such underestimation, right, is the higher productivity when they consume healthcare and remain healthy. So because of the imperfect information of consumer, it causes a deviation between perceived MPV and true MPV. Okay, then in this case, if you leave it to the free market, there will be an underconsumption of your Q to Q star unit. Okay, so in this case, since there's an underconsumption, it means that MSB is greater than MSC. Which means that there is additional net gain to society welfare that can be reaped if more healthcare is consumed. Hence, at output level Q star, hence at output level Q, a deadweight loss is incurred. Hence leading to partial market failure. Okay, then in this case, right, when we are talking about the healthcare due to ignorance, you need to always identify your deadweight loss. Okay, now moving on to the more interesting part. This one, I'm sure you guys have done it a lot of times in school. So this one, the next one that I'll be talking about is another source of market failure, which is your inequity.
Okay, especially in an aging population scenario like Singapore. So you need to understand, right, in a free market, goods and services are allocated to consumers according to consumers' ability and willingness to pay. So this means that, right, the more resources will be diverted to the provision of consumers who are willing and able to pay. So consumers will signal their ability or how much are they willing to pay for them, right? Those with the higher dollar vote means those who are willing to pay more resources will be allocated to this group of consumers. And on the other hand, the free market has no incentives to cater to the needs of those who are not able to pay for the goods, even if they really, really need them. So the free market is a very cruel market. They don't care. They don't care whether you need them or not. They only want to produce for people who are willing and able to pay for it. Okay, so in the healthcare market, consumers from the low income households or your elderly, the aged, right, they will actually have less dollar vote as compared to consumers from high income household. So based on this fact, right, your private producers will only provide healthcare services to consumers from the higher income households with the higher dollar votes, and they will not produce the resources for people from the low income households because, right, like the price signals, your marginalist principle basically. Okay, so the free market will therefore find it no incentives to cater to the needs of those who are not able to pay for the good. Okay, so in this case, your resources will be diverted away from low-income households to the high-income household in the healthcare market. So it will lead to healthcare needs of the low-income household as well as your aged not being met. So far until here, any questions? Oh, someone asked, can we combine the two graph and explain together? Yeah, you can if you did not draw the graph like how I drew. Okay, because there are two ways to draw the graph. So the first way is a different school will teach differently. The first way is how I shifted it. When you're positive, when we are looking at positive externality, right? We are always shifting the benefit curve. When we are looking at negative externalities, we are always shifting the cost curve. But for some schools, they shift it according to production or consumption. So if this is a negative externality in consumption, no matter what, I am shifting my demand curve. But if it's a negative externality in production, I will be shifting my cost curve. So if you're using this method, yes, you can combine the graph together. Okay, but if not, you cannot combine the graph together. If you are still confused, you can ask me more later on. I'll explain more to you later. Okay, so right, for the first question, I will answer you later. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so in this case, right, when we talk about allocative resources, this is how you explain it. So 43. So for body 3, the third source of market failure in the healthcare may be inequity. Okay, especially that is where you bring in your aging population in Singapore. So in the free market, goods and services are allocated to consumers willingness and ability to pay for them. Consumers signal their ability and willingness to pay using dollar vote. So dollar vote is something you can memorize and put it in your essay. So higher dollar vote equals more resources diverted to the provision of the good or service. So the free market hence finds no incentive to cater
to the needs of those who are not able to pay for the goods, even if they need them the most. So in the healthcare market, consumers from low income group or the aged will have less dollar votes compared to consumers from high income household. Okay. Then the next part, hence, right, you need to explain how did the market fail. So as a result, so your private producers only provide healthcare services to consumers. Private healthcare providers only provide healthcare services to consumers who need them, to consumers who are willing to pay the most, which in another word, the one with the higher dollar votes. Okay, not so and they will not be paying, they will not be producing for consumers from the low income households. Hence, resources will be diverted away from the low income households to the high income households in the healthcare market. Hence, this resulting in the healthcare needs of low income not being met. Okay, hence, right, the use of dollar votes in the free markets will result in inequity, which leads to your market failure. Will result in, okay, so because at the last part, the poor and aged do not have access to the good which is regarded as necessity. Okay, so over here, I want to pause a while and let you know that if, let's say, there are other factors that you want to talk about, like asymmetric information, where your doctors knows more than your patient, right? You can talk about how, like, you lead to over prescription of medicines and tests. So this is what I mentioned about your supply induced demand, especially when patient, right, is covered by medical insurance. So your healthcare providers will make use of it and exploit your consumers. So these will, at the end of the day, lead to overconsumption of healthcare. So we don't want underconsumption, we also don't want overconsumption. We want socially optimal level. And next, we can move on to how, in order to alleviate such inefficient allocation of resources and inequity, the government would need to intervene to correct the market failure. So, like, based on the policy graph, the summary graph that I showed you, what government can do, government can provide subsidies. Okay, then you need to know how to draw your subsidies graph. Government can also use legislation. Okay, the government can also, other than subsidies, other than your legislation, right? Your government can also propose using public education. Okay, so this kind, right, you always need to tell me what are the pros and cons of the various policies. Usually, we will bring in around like 3 policies to evaluate on when it's a 25 marks essay questions. So right now, I'm going to show you how to draw the graph for subsidies, because some students find it quite complicated because it's 4 curve that you're talking about over here. Okay, then in terms of evaluation of the graph, I will briefly talk about it because I don't want to hold up too much of the time. But if there's because everything is in front, like the evaluations and everything. So for policies, I would say it's relatively easier, and it's just the explaining of your how it links to your market failure part is where most students find it the hardest. And then we will wrap it up with the conclusion and how we weigh our essay. So weighing is also important because it gives you the evaluation mark that you want. So for subsidies, okay, initially this is your subsidies graph. Then what actually happened, you draw what happened first, so you can show like when you impose the subsidies, what will then happen again. So initially, this is where your marginal private benefit, which is also known as your demand curve. And then since there's no negative externalities, so your marginal private cost is equals to marginal social cost, which is also equals to your supply curve. That's why supply curve did not shift, but later when the subsidies come in, you might get a little confused. So this is where your society is consuming at. Okay, your cost benefit curve. Always remember to label your axis. This is your quantity. Okay, so where the so this is where just now I drew it like that. I didn't draw it because it is more inelastic. It is called the divergence curve. Some school, they draw it like this. They just draw it parallel. Either ways are fine. Yeah, so just take note of this. So for some schools, they will draw it parallel to each other, but some schools, they want to draw it in a divergence manner. That's why just now someone asked me, why is it more inelastic? Yeah, that's the reason. It's not more inelastic, it's because there's a divergence. Okay, but if your school teaches you the parallel method, you just use the parallel method. Both are acceptable. Okay, so in this case, this is your socially optimal level. This is where I want my goods to be produced at, and this is where the socially optimal price should be at. Okay, then now you need to measure where is your marginal external benefits. So here is your marginal external benefit. The divergence between your marginal private cost and your marginal private benefit and your marginal social benefit is actually your marginal external benefits. Then now this is where your subsidies will come in. So your government wants you to consume at this level. I also want you to consume at this level. So remember, for your subsidy curve, right, it must always be parallel. So this is where your subsidies comes in. Let's draw green because it's a good thing. So it must intersect here. So this is your subsidies curve. Your new MPC curve will be here, equals to MSC, where society deem it as the socially desirable level. Wait, sorry. Here don't need draw MSC, here put supply. Yeah. Okay, so now because of these subsidies, right, you will notice that your price, right, of paying for this good, right, is lower as well. But your quantity level is being met at the socially optimal level. So this is where your government, right, will use this. Government will always try to give subsidies that's equals to your MEB because they want to reduce the level such that consumers will attend at socially optimal level. Okay, so by giving subsidies equals to MEB level at your Q star will help to reduce the marginal cost of production. So always remember, when you talk about subsidies, when government give subsidies equals to MEB, you must always talk about your lowering of cost of production. So you need to lower cost of production. So when you lower your marginal cost of production of the firm, it actually is being lowered from, you see, cost is being lowered, right? from here to here. So you lower your marginal cost. That's why there is a rightward shift over here. Now producers are more willing to supply. So since there is a fall in marginal cost of production, it means that your private party will internalize the external benefits to society. So always use this word, internalize external benefit, internalize external cost. Use the word internalize. Okay, to society. So now your new market equilibrium is at your marginal private benefits equals to your prime. Yeah, this is your new equilibrium here, E2. Okay, so at this level, right, you will notice that it coincides with the socially optimal equilibrium, which is your MSB equals to MSC, correct? Because MSC is over here and here is your MSB. So at this socially optimal level, when you dot up, it actually coincides. So this is where what we want. This is where socially optimal pricing level. Okay, so this is what the government is trying to target. They want to give subsidies for the low income patients for staying, probably like stays in public hospitals, and also making healthcare services more affordable to them. And not to worry, I will do up the answer keys and send it to you guys also. And also, for example, some examples you can bring in is your pioneers and elderlies. They hold a pioneer generation card. All these include subsidies as well. You can talk about the trust card, which is also known as your community health assist scheme, and they can also seek services at private clinics by paying subsidized consultation fee. So this, right, will help to resolve inequity. Especially among the aged, because you see, there are so many incentives for your aged. They have this pioneer generation card and etc. Okay, now here comes the evaluation. Evaluation means you tell me why is this policy not that good after all. Okay, so for subsidies, right, for the evaluation, okay, so true, subsidies can increase consumption and make healthcare more affordable, but there are certain limitations to it. Firstly, government do not have accurate information. Okay, hence unable to give accurate valuation of the external benefits. That's why this means that your government may not know the socially optimal amount of subsidies to give in order to attain the socially efficient output level. Okay, so right, if the government over subsidize or under subsidize, it might lead to what? It might lead to continued inefficiency and welfare loss to the society. So it will result in continued inefficiency. Of course, you did not solve the problem. And welfare loss to society. Okay, and in addition, right, you'll notice that due to high government expenditure required, especially now Singapore is facing aging population, right? It means that government will only be able to use subsidies as a short-term measure. You cannot use subsidies forever. Like, how long can you use to keep giving subsidies to your aged, correct? So this is a short-term measure, and the opportunity cost of spending on subsidies may be very high, given that it might actually eventually slow down the Singapore's economy. So high government expenditure required because of aging population. Okay, then government only able to use this as a short-term measure because opportunity cost is high. Then you need to tell me what is the opportunity cost. In this case, it's the slowing down of economy. Okay, so next I mentioned about legislation. So legislation, you can say like government made it compulsory to like for everyone to vaccinate, or made it compulsory for people to go for annual health checkup. So it's like a rule, a law. Okay, so legislation to correct under consumption. So for example, like for your MediSave fund, government have to set aside. These are all examples that you can use because it's real examples that the government has already used. So government made it compulsory for adults to set aside 8 to 10% of their income contributed to MediSave. Okay, and to use part of this MediSave fund to purchase their medical insurance in the form of MediShield Life and subsidies. So in this case, right, it kind of like gives your consumer the responsibility to take care of their health and to make sure that they have enough fund, enough money to pay for their medical bills in times of need. Okay, so yeah, the inclusion of your MediFund will actually address the issue of equity to a certain extent, because right, the use of this measure will help individuals to reduce like how much they have to pay when they go to the clinic out of their pockets. Okay, so this will increase the marginal private benefits of the patients and their family members. That's why they will be more inclined to go for healthcare checkup. So hence, at the end of the day, your legislation will help to correct the underconsumption of your medical services in the healthcare market. But then you need to evaluate as well. Anyway, if I'm going too fast or like you didn't catch what I say, you can stay back after the session to ask me more. Okay, so for legislation, you need to understand that like the purchase of such insurance will actually means that people will make use of like they think, okay, oh, I got insurance, like it's okay, I will just do risky activity, insurance covered anyway. So they don't care about their health. They are not afraid of the healthcare costs that will be incurred, because at the back of their mind, they know that insurance will save them. So this is the bad thing about your legislation, where you force your citizens to purchase insurance. Okay, then the last one is your public education. Okay, so public education is more like to correct imperfect information. Okay, so right, just now I mentioned underconsumption will actually lead to underconsumption is also due to the presence of imperfect information. So this means that you need to have public education to educate your people that the importance and benefits of healthcare. It's not just like seeing doctor when you're sick. It's more like preventive healthcare that we are talking about here. Importance of preventive healthcare. When You let people know the importance of preventive healthcare. You are encouraging them to go for health screening. Okay, because like for example, some people they don't know like the benefits of preventive healthcare. So yeah, public education is likely to is very important. Like if you see, right, health promotion board, they have been actively coming up with public health campaigns, posters, advertisements, encouraging public to go for health screening. Okay, yeah, especially they have been actively promoting the harmful effects of your diabetes, breast cancer, or this like by showing the very bad effects of what diabetes can bring you about, or what breast cancers can lead to. It instills that fear in your consumers, and it makes your consumer feel I really need to go for health checkup. What if like one day I kena diabetes or like yeah, or breast cancer. Okay, so you can give examples. Organizations like Breast Cancer Foundation, National Cancer Center actually provide awareness programs like talks, roadshows, okay, to let them know the importance of early detection of breast cancers. Okay, especially in the month of October, to encourage more women to go for these checkups, especially for elderly women. They try to encourage them to go for mammograms. Okay, so but we need to understand that true, public education can help to improve the resource allocation of healthcare services in Singapore. But right, the such efforts, right, it will help to close up the gap of your MPB and your perceived MPB and your true MPB, but not the root cause of imperfect information. So always remember, like for public education and your subsidies, you always have to say like, or it may not tackle the root cause. So why? Okay, so it may not tackle root cause, right? Because it takes time for consumers to change their mindset. And also the government have to think about how to make such information more accessible to the elderlies. So for elderlies, right, this kind of public education may not be more effective. Like today I ask you to ask your grandparents go sit in front of the computer and listen to talks, or go to some health promotion board and listen to talks. They may not be well aware that there are such programs going on. Okay, and also like the language barrier, probably it'll be conducted in English, or some of them may not even understand Mandarin. So these are the considerations and constraints which your government have to consider about. Okay, so right, remember just now I talked about asymmetric information. So if you happen to bring in asymmetric information, if let's say your root cause of asymmetric information is due to your supply induced demand, so means like your doctor says, I think you need this, I think you need that, you're based on what I think you need to go for this checkup. So they want to exploit you by paying all these services, and you yourself think that okay, there's insurance cover, okay, let's go for it. Okay, so in this case, right, you are consuming at a level that you may not need to consume. So at the end of the day, it might lead to overconsumption. So in this case, right, what the government can do is government can require hospitals to provide more information about the availability of standard treatments and diagnosis tests for the different type of conditions. So this will allow your patient, you educate your patients, let them know that, oh, okay, if I have this illness, I only need to go for this treatment. Anything beyond that, I don't really need it. It's an option. Okay, so right, government can do this as a requirement. So this will help to reduce your supplier-induced demand problem. Hence, narrowing your marginal, shifting your marginal private benefit to the true marginal private benefit, and hence reducing the overconsumption of this good. Okay, now we have finally reached to the conclusion. Okay, so for conclusion, right, I know like for some of you, maybe you have time to write the conclusion during exam, but even no time, also try to move on. You really must move on, even if you cannot finish your paragraph. You must move on to the conclusion, state your stance and substantiate why you think so. So for your stance over here, we would say that like Singapore government, true, we actually adopt a lot of strategies. Okay, we have like various strategies in place to address market failure for healthcare. And these policies, right, actually aim to address the problems of underconsumption due to externalities through the provision of subsidies and legislation. So if the government uses subsidies and legislation to tackle the problem of underconsumption. Okay, then in order to tackle the problem of your imperfect information, the government use public education. Okay, so to tackle the problem of imperfect information, then in this case, for inequity, while it's still in the market, while it can be corrected through targeted subsidies like Medifund. Okay, so actually your subsidies here, right, can also target your inequity for the different groups of consumers. Okay, so currently the current mix of government policy are effective to address different sources. So this has to be in the context of Singapore. Okay, so in this case, right, in order to make sure that considering the nature of Singapore economy, it should also channel more resources to policies that focus more on equity. Okay, so you are telling that, okay, in the context of Singapore, the government should channel more resources to policies that focus more on inequity. Okay, so now you need to substantiate why inequity in particular. Actually, the preamble already gave you hint. Aging population. So in light of aging population, equity issue is probably the most significant source of market failure in Singapore. So now you need to back up, substantiate. So because preamble mentioned aging population, so you should highlight that inequity is probably the most significant source of market failure in Singapore. So in this case, right, it will probably likely to worsen the future, which might severely increase the burden of Singapore government. So the government financial burden likely to increase, likely to increase or worsen in future, which might, as aging population progress. Okay, so right, to address this issue, right, your government has moved towards more targeted subsidies via means testings, where subsidies are given in accordance to household income instead of instead of a one size fit all solution to everyone. Okay, so the government actually conducted means testing to give subsidies to people who need it the most. So even though spending on subsidies will increase over time, maybe because of higher cost of medical services, right? I mean, like 10 years down the road, your healthcare cost will not be the same cost as now. Okay, so this, right, is actually not sustainable, and it can actually so by spending your spending on subsidies will increase over time, like I mentioned, because it will lead to higher cost of because of the higher cost of medical services. So right, this method is unsustainable in the long run. So the government can actually lower the financial burden. So it gives suggestions. Okay, so you can say like can lower financial burden by increasing the proportion of CPF that goes into MediSave account. So this is to ensure that Singaporeans will have enough money when they are old to pay for their healthcare services. Okay, so this will, yeah, like I said, encourage Singaporeans to be less reliant on government for areas of spending on their healthcare expenditure. And by doing so, right, it can allow your government to free up resources to focus on other economic problems or other economic areas, or spending to boost labor productivity. I think areas is a better word. Okay, then right, these resources can also be channeled into the expansion of public hospitals and community hospitals to ensure that there are sufficient facilities to all at affordable price. Okay, providing more facilities or like expansion of public hospitals or community hospitals to ensure that there are sufficient healthcare facility at an affordable price. Okay, this also encourages greater competition in the healthcare market. Because when you keep your prices affordable, your private hospitals will actually lose out, right? So it will actually encourage greater competition in the healthcare market. Okay, which will then also improve quality of healthcare provided. Oh, okay, so right, this will actually help to yeah, you have to give suggestions to your the problems that you mentioned about. Okay, we have come to the end of this essay, but wait, I will address the problems in the chat. Okay, so just now let's move back to the previous question. Someone asked, inequity is resource allocation. Then what does inequitable distribution of income means? Income is the resource, or does it mean that the poor are less likely to afford essential goods? Okay, when I say inequitable distribution of income and inequity, right, is actually the same thing. What I'm trying to say is because you're poor, do not have enough money to signal that they want the good because of the dollar vote. So resources, the demand and supply interactions, producers will only produce to people who are willing and able to afford. So this means that they don't want to allocate to the poor. So this means that they will not price it affordably such that your lower income group can afford the good, which means that you are neglecting your poor from enjoying these healthcare services. Now, right, you cannot understand like this situation in Singapore because the government is doing such a great job to correct such problems, such that you don't feel like one day you cannot afford healthcare. But it's a very real issue in other countries whereby the poor actually have no access to healthcare at all because their government does not have the capability to address such problem. They have such a huge population that is very hard to control. Yeah, so such inequity is very hard to address in greater countries. And here's what I mean by you are excluding the poor from enjoying these necessity goods in the society. So just remember, inequity means only the rich will be able to signal for higher prices, that they are able to buy what they want in layman's term.
but the poor, they cannot buy what they want because you have such limited resources. How do you determine who to allocate it to, correct? But producers, being profit motivated, they will only produce to those who are willing and able to afford at a higher price. And at the end of the day, when all the resources are being allocated to people who are willing and able to afford, then your poor will not have such resources left. Okay, then someone asked about COVID-19 vaccination. Okay, yeah, but for Singapore, right, your government pays for it, so it's fine. Yeah, so we are actually very lucky. And what is dollar vote? Dollar vote, right? It's just an economics term, which was what I mentioned just now. You can remember this economics term. So instead of like saying, the rich signal the price for producers to allocate to the high income group, we can say those who have higher dollar vote will get the resources allocated to them, and resources will be diverted away from the lower income group who have lower dollar vote. Dollar vote means, right, your ability to pay at a higher price, like how much are you able and willing afford to pay. Okay, then right, someone also asked why did, oh yeah, the inelastic one. Okay, is it different for direct subsidy and indirect subsidy? Okay, when we talk about direct subsidies and indirect subsidies, right? Direct subsidies, right, is more like grants, giving vouchers and to your lower income groups, which we didn't touch on here. The subsidies that we are talking about here, right, is where you give subsidies to your healthcare group, your producers. Then when producers receive these subsidies, they now they lower their marginal cost of production, right? They are more willing to produce more healthcare services, and they will pass on this lower cost to your consumers. And at the end of the day, your consumers get to enjoy it at a lower price. Okay, so this is the difference between your direct and indirect subsidies. Direct subsidies means like giving vouchers, giving grants for your lower income group so that they can afford basic necessity goods. So direct subsidies, how do you show cost of consumption increase? What do you mean direct subsidies? How do you show cost of consumption increase? Can you explain in the chat, like what do you mean by this? Like elaborate a bit more. Okay, so what difference between debt weight loss? Oh, debt weight loss is welfare loss. So just another term of saying, I like to say like hence incurring a debt weight loss, which is a welfare loss to society. So it's more like it's clearer, but they are the same thing. Okay, debt weight loss is more like what you see in the graph. So the triangle is called debt weight loss, and that debt weight loss is a welfare loss to society. Be able to talk about command measures like free direct provision, but later evaluate that it is not effective. Yes, you can talk about it, but I would say that that's a very small portion, because right, for direct provision there's not much you can talk about, not much explanation compared to if let's say I give subsidies. You notice that my policy, I can bring in my graph to talk about, I can explain it to talk about. It's not about bringing it for the sake of bringing it in. It's more about, right, what are the most common policies that you're doing during A-level. So imagine all your other peers, they brought in subsidies and they had so much explanation to talk about. They talk about they evaluate the pros and cons as well, right? Then they draw their graph. But for you, you only talk about direct provision and you only explain so little. Then it's not very advisable. But I would say that if you have time, right, you can put it in, and then yeah, you can later evaluate, say it's not effective. Dollar vote. Did I answer this? Oh yeah, dollar vote. I answered it already. How do we write so much okay, yeah, so how do we write so much in a short amount of time? So one thing that I really encourage you guys to do is to do time practice. It's very important to do time practice under time conditions. So maybe I can share a bit more like what I did. So previously I realized that even though I have the content, but I cannot finish writing my essays in the exam. So firstly, one very important thing is always must plan. So for example, for essays, right, 3 questions, you have to finish it in 2 hours and 15 minutes. So this means that per question is 40 minutes. So one part A is 20 minutes. So you need to dedicate like 5 minutes for your planning for that part A. Then really plan very thoroughly. You tell me introduction, okay, no need to write everything out, but let's scribble. So you tell me factor 1, what are you going to bring in? What's your end point? Always must have end point. Then in between, right, you must see that they really link it all the way to the endpoint. That's where you know you're on track, especially for macroeconomics, right? A lot of students, they will be very excited. I know this point, I'm going to link it. Then you realize that, right, you start talking about unemployment, you start talking about all your different things already, but that's not what the question wants. You tell me so many things for what? I don't need it. Okay, that's where you lose out your marks already. So always write your starting point and end point. Okay, then you'll realize that, right, everything you write starts to be very smooth. And yeah, you cannot stop writing. During A level, I just kept writing. Everyone's hands just keeps moving. So really practice under time practice. I'm not expecting you to spend 2 hours and 15 minutes every day to do time practice. Every day practice one question. You only need 40 minutes of your time. You don't have 40 minutes, never mind, practice part A. It's really like, you, even if you feel are not ready or prepared, or you don't have the content now, right? You just force yourself to write something out. And when you realize that, oh, this is the part that I'm not sure about, after your time practice, go back to your content and then polish it up. The wrong way to study, right, is flip through your notes again and again, think that you're ready, then start practicing. That's wrong. I know that you don't like the insecure feeling of not knowing your content and writing out, but A level is less than 8 months. This is something that you really have to prepare yourself for when the day comes. Okay, cost direct subsidies is to consumers. Wait, sorry. Cannot really see. Oh, okay. Wait, can I ask, like, who asked can answer your question first, because I need to know what question you asked. Can you type your question again, then I'll answer now. What if direct subsidies? How do you show the? Oh, okay. So if it's direct subsidies, cost of consumption. Oh, okay. So if it's direct subsidies, right, it basically means your demand increase, right? So your demand will be the one shifting, not your supply. Okay. So in this case, right, usually in market failure, our indirect subsidies will be, yeah. So for indirect subsidies, usually like vouchers or this, we will not draw the graph. It's usually in your other chapters where you talk about indirect subsidies, right? Then you draw your demand curve, the graph. Yeah. So for direct subsidies, you are shifting your demand curve, because when you are giving your consumers the direct subsidies, your demand curve will increase. Did I answer your question? So if your demand curve increase, it means that now it is more affordable to afford these goods. So demand will naturally increase. Yeah. So when your demand, okay. So over here, right, in market failure, we don't know. So in this case, right, when we talk about direct subsidies, we don't shift our we always give indirect subsidies for market failure. But if let's say you're talking about like direct subsidies, that's in other chapters like your demand and supply curve, then you don't need to bring in NPV. Okay, that's why, right, don't bring in NPV when you are giving direct subsidies. It's because, right, for your market failure, usually we do indirect subsidies. Then when you want to talk about direct subsidies like grants and vouchers, those, right, are like additional parts that you talk about. You don't only bring in direct subsidies and then you neglect your indirect subsidies, because government always have to give indirect subsidies to correct the underconsumption. And then when you want to bring in your direct subsidies, you talk about grants and vouchers, which is an additional part to it. So you don't bring in your indirect subsidies. So when you talk about your vouchers and grants, you don't need to draw a graph. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. So but direct, wait, did I answer? Okay, I answer. Okay, do you okay, do you have any questions? Do you still have any questions? If not, I'll move on. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so basically in order to master your A-level contents, always have to do time practice under time condition, and don't just memorize, because memorizing your contents and vomiting out is really not advisable, and high chance, right, you'll just get an average grade. So for econs, is really all about applications, and I've been there, done that. I really tried. I know that the only way to improve is
practice. Okay, so every day from now onwards, just practice just 20 minutes of your time to practice under time condition, and also attempt your prelim papers, your 10-year series, and under time condition. Then after that, go back to your answer key and see where have you made such mistake. Always go for consultations with your teacher. Then yeah, by doing all this, you're already testing yourself. So also to let you guys know that we have this we'll be conducting crash courses. And for econs, I'll be touching on other topics as well. Like for module 1, it will be on the 10th of October. And I'll be touching on demand and supply as well as elasticities. So this will be how I will be categorizing on my my crash courses. So market failure, this will be a recorded lecture. So those who have missed out on any parts, I'll be sending it in the group chat with the updated notes. And also for market failure, I'll be focusing more on imperfect information and also your market structure. Most importantly, market structure, because market structure is a huge bulk of the whole topic. And I'm very sure a lot of people, they are very confused with the shift in the graph. And last but not least, module 3 is macroeconomics, and also will be bringing in examples, relatable examples on Singapore economy. Yeah, it's very important to know how your Singapore economy works, especially in the macroeconomic arena. So I'll be giving examples and letting you know how to answer such questions, because in the examination, they like to ask about Singapore. Okay, and here will be the curated notes. So per booklet is over here, which I will send you later on. Yeah, like Q&A, the last part. Any last questions to ask before I end the session? If not, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate. Oh, thank you. Okay. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this lecture. And yeah, if you have any questions or any problems, you can always contact me. Yeah, I do give private tuition. If you're interested, you can drop me a text or telegram me. I'll just type my number down here. Yeah. Okay. Oh. Okay. Yeah, this is my number. If you have any issues or any questions you want to ask me, you can always drop me a text. Yeah, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And also, if you're interested to like pursue econs in uni, you can also ask me. I will enlighten you how's econs like in uni. Okay, so if no questions, you can leave the chat, and if there's any questions, you can stay behind and ask me as well. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.